Happy Monday, everybody, and welcome to our Women Sports Forum discussion. This is our monthly discussion with Dr. Greg Charlot and myself. My name is Miriam Glaise. I'm a two-time Olympian in the sport of synchronized swimming, a supporter of the Women's Sports Forum, and here your host with Dr. Greg monthly for this discussion. Today we're joined with Jean Kanokoji from USA Judo. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation because our theme is going to be about toughness, women in sport, women in male-dominated sport, and there will be a lot to learn about. Before we get started, I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Greg to talk a little bit about the Women's Sports Forum, and then I'll give you some instruction before we get started. Dr. Greg, your turn.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I'm Dr. Greg Charlot, and I'm a co-founder of the Women's Sports Forum. And for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, our goal is to help empower women athletes, women sports fans, women entrepreneurs who are interested in the sports industry, and generally to sort of promote women's sports throughout all levels, from school age all the way through professional sports and beyond. And we have these events where we talk to prominent women leaders, and we're very excited to have Jean here with us today from Team USA Judo, which I'm sure this is going to be an interesting conversation. And a lot of this is actually going to lead into one of our big projects we have coming up, from soccer to C-suite, where we're talking about how events that girls go through, particularly sports and leadership activities, how that helps them launch their careers and lives into success. And so the importance of what girls do in empowering them to become successful, powerful business and sports leading women. So we're very happy to have Jean here. She's a perfect example of that. And thank you for joining us.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. And let me introduce myself because I wear so many different hats. And I'm going to talk about the head that's under each one of those hats today. And hopefully you'll get some really cool information and be very interested in the topic. You know, it's about women's sports, it's about women empowerment, and it's also about women inspiration, but also working with our male counterparts and our male allies. So a bit about me. I am a United States federal agent. That means I'm a special agent and I work for the US government. Another thing about me is I volunteer as the Director of Mental Health and Peer Support for the Federal Law Enforcement. So I have a PhD. Our men and women in law enforcement bridge the gap and smash the stigma to get the help they need for mental health. I recently helped author a bill that was recently signed into law, S-1502, to give confidential opportunities for peer support in federal law enforcement. This is monumental because it's really opening the doors for people to get the help that they need. So I volunteer in that position, and it's so rewarding because I just can't even tell you how many people we're helping. Another thing that I did is I recently wrote a book. It's called Get Up and Fight. And it is the story of the mother of women's judo. The mother of women's judo, because she fought to get women's judo into the Olympics when everybody told her no against all odds. How she was tough, how she let her toughness fight the adversity, and how she did not stop. Her indomitable spirit was relentless. And I had no choice but to grow up in that path. And now I'm widening the girth because I'm trying to pave the way for more people in law enforcement, mental health, and in judo. One of the projects I'm involved in with USA Judo is the P3 program, which we're also crossed over with the FLEOA 111 project. What is that? Simple. We're giving men and women in law enforcement tools to use, martial arts, judo tools, Krav Maga, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, all of these tools so that they don't immediately have to go to their bat belt and grab a tool from the bat belt. They can go hands-on, and they're more comfortable going hands-on. And there's probably going to be a lot less issues when people have more confidence in the martial arts and they can utilize judo techniques for takedowns and keep the use of force necessary only specific to the event that's happening. So those are a couple of things that I'm involved in. When I say so many hats, those really are my hats. I also do public speaking and book signing and all that other stuff. And who knows what else? I'll deliver a pizza. I mean, I'm just out there doing everything.
Well, Jean, thank you for being here. You really are someone who shatters glass ceilings all over the place. And so we're thrilled to have you. And I know we're going to have some interesting and probably a little controversial discussions, which I'm looking forward to here. And so I want to just start off by asking you, you're a judo champion, and judo historically, and this is actually even how we got introduced, judo historically has been a largely male-dominated sport. So what was it like being a woman in such a traditionally male-dominated sport?
Well, for me, it was very unique because growing up as the daughter of women's judo to the mother of women's judo, I experienced a lot of different things coming up in this sport. Most of the time I would hear, oh boy, that's Rusty's daughter. Uh-oh, that's Rusty's daughter. So I immediately got tagged with having a certain toughness because of Rusty. So let me tell you a little bit about Rusty Kanikogi. She grew up in the early 50s in Brooklyn, New York, where she raised herself. It was really a tumultuous childhood in Coney Island. And she was babysat and raised by people called freaks back then from the Freak Show. So, and a pinhead sister, realized people were making fun of them because they looked different. And nobody told her, but then she realized, you're not supposed to do that. This is where she started building her character and realized that you're not supposed to make fun of people just for being different. And I'm going to stand up for these people because it's not right, because they made her feel warm and welcome and part of their family. It's unnecessary to do this and to exploit people. So now she's starting to feel empowered. The other thing that she started to do is in Coney Island, they had these rides where women would go through predominantly wearing dresses, and some of the people from the carnival would pinch them, and then the skirts would blow up and they would get so scared and they would be embarrassed because they were exposed. So Rusty took her gang of female people in her, or the gang of tough women in her neighborhood, and they got revenge. And they went and pinched these little guys and embarrassed them. And all of these guys were running around. So she was avenging womanhood growing up as a teen. But then she got mixed into a street gang. And when I say street gang, not like what we know now, for gangs, but they would meet in schoolyards and have fist fights. So she was a street gang leader in Coney Island, and imagine with the chartreuse jacket and the pedal pushers, and she was all about accountability. So one day they had a street gang a fight scheduled. Well, her gang didn't show up, and Rusty took the brunt of the entire fight. So Rusty went to each and every one of their homes, and she showed them what accountability looked like. But then she realized, this isn't the life for her. And she thought maybe if she got married, this would pull her out of all of this street nonsense. So she got married early. And unfortunately, the man she married was a drinker, a heavy drinker, and he ended up going to Al-Anon. He ended up going to AA, where she went to Al-Anon to support him. And while she was at Al-Anon, she met a man who looked like he worked out, and they became friends because she was always excited to work out and she always wanted to exercise. So she asked, well, what do you do? And he said, well, I lift weights and I do judo. Now, this is in the 1950s. And what's judo? Well, it's a Japanese martial arts. Now, in the 50s, anything Japanese was really not welcomed in the United States because we were at war. So she said, well, what is this judo? And he said, I'll show you. He picked her up in a judo technique on his hip, like she was a lightweight. Now, Rusty was 5'9", 200 pounds of muscle. And he just picked her up like she was nothing. She said, that's it. I forgive Japan for everything. I need to learn this. And she went to, she said, okay, well, I'm going to go with you. Where do you go? And he told her, I go to the Prospect Park YMCA. And she shows up for judo class. She sees the instructor and says, I want to learn judo. And the instructor, deadpan face, said, no women. No women. She kept on showing up, and she kept on showing up. And that's part of what I learned in her footsteps. If you want something, if you're hungry for something, you are relentless and you keep showing up. You don't just whine about it, you show up. So that's what she did. And they finally let her in the judo class. She took her bumps and bruises. There were no place for her to for her to change. So she had to change in a broom closet. There were no ladies' locker rooms. Well, then they made a deal. If you want to keep learning judo, Rusty, I'll tell you what, you can learn judo one day, but now we're going to be progressive and we're going to have you teach judo the next day, because this was amazing. They had a strong woman. She said, fine, deal. Camaraderie that got built into this class, which the ironic part is the YMCA, which is the Young Men's Christian Association. This joining at a YMCA. So this is amazing. Well, in 1959, she had a judo tournament, and she wasn't competing because there were no women allowed, but she thought when she walked into that tournament, wow, this would be great if I could compete. But she took her judo gi, which is her judo robe, and you wear a jacket. And she said, well, you know, this way I can help warm up the guys. This way the guys can practice on me before they compete. And as she was warming up with one of her teammates, she heard a yell from across the mat, and she looked. It was one of her teammates. He got injured, and they were all worried now they can't compete in the team tournament. And this was a big championships in New York State. Her coach, I want you to take his place. But don't call attention to yourself. So there was no pressure on her to win because she was a woman. He said, just pull a draw. No pressure. This is unfair. And, well, don't call it. She went to that locker room at the YMCA in Utica, New York, and she took an ace bandage and she wrapped her chest. She was androgynous looking. She had short hair. She was muscular. She was tall. So just to make sure, she wrapped down her chest with an ace bandage. As soon as she went to compete, she bowed onto the mat. In judo, we have respect. We bow to each other. Her opponent looked like he wanted to kill her, because the only thing that stood between his team winning first place was his match. He had to win in order for his team to win first place. Well, Rusty said, okay, no pressure, just pull a draw, nice and even. She hears in her head, go Rusty, go Rusty. And she doesn't know if it was her team saying that or if it was her. So they got their grips on each other's judo gi. And it was like a fist fight just to get a grip, because nobody says, oh, here, grab me, please. So it was like a fist fight. She gets her grip, he gets his grip, and she comes in on a technique, and she fully commits in that technique, no hesitation. And she throws this guy for a full point and wins, literally smashes this guy through the mat. She was like, oh my goodness, yes, I won. Oh crap, I won. And that was her reaction. So her team got awarded the trophy. She got a gold medal put around her neck, and she, like, I finally got a medal instead of a citation for fighting. Because usually for fighting, you can get a citation or get arrested, but now she's getting an award. She is hooked. Women have to compete, she's thinking. This is amazing. Walking to her car, just floating on air, taking in the smell of the mat area, looking around. She could not believe she finally won a medal, something that she trained for, something that she was equal to the men. They all got medals. And then the tournament director came up to her and he said, excuse me, a word, please. And at first, Rusty thought, well, maybe he's going to compliment me on my technique. But, you know, as human beings, when people want a word, when people say we need to talk, the first place we go is we start ruminating into that negative mind space. Uh-oh, now what? So, but Rusty had that unique ability to first start out in something positive, and then the reality hits. And he said to her in a very accusatory tone, are you a girl? And he's just like, dude, I'm a woman. Like, recognize I'm a woman. I'm not a child. Well, he said, well, I'm sorry, no girls can compete in here. We'll need that medal back. And she stood there, her heart pounding, her heart racing. She told the coach, and she went back and told the coach. Coach said, fine, we'll all give our medals back. At that point, all the men were banded with Rusty and said, no, this is unacceptable. And she said, no, you all won fair and square. I will give my medal back. She goes up to the tournament director, returns the medal. And at that moment, when she took that medal off from around her neck, she said, no woman shall ever suffer such an indignity ever again, not on my watch. That was her purpose. Her purpose in life right there was defined. And what she did after that, she went hook, line, and sinker, put her entire self into the sport of judo and went to Japan to learn and train, because Japan is where judo came from. Japan is the mecca of judo. So she went to the Kodokan to train, where Professor Jigoro Kano started judo. And when she got there, they put her on the woman's side to learn the judo form, to learn the judo kata. But Rusty wanted the combat judo. She wanted to fight. Finally, what did she do? Just like what we want to do. You keep showing up, and she showed up on the men's side nonstop while they finally let her in. And that's where she embodied that mantra, fall down 7, get up 8, because boy, did she take her lumps. But she kept on getting up. So she was gaining the respect from some of the most elite judo players and Japanese men that they didn't even know what they were dealing with. I mean, first of all, a redhead from Brooklyn, somebody, a different type of nose, a woman from New York. And one of her friends went home on break, and his father said, you know, that woman, I see her at the Kodokan. Oh, he was so proud. Oh no, she's my friend. I know her. And his father said, well, you should marry her. She'll give you big, strong babies. Look how big she is. So I call him Dad. So it's very funny, because that's what my dad did. That was my grandfather that told my father, marry that woman. And it's interesting, because the love story is not just a love of judo, but a love of each other. She came back to the United States, and they said their goodbyes. And again, this is 1962. So it's not like we had internet. It's not like, you could just even pick up the phone and make a phone call. Well, my dad had an opportunity to teach judo anywhere in the world. He was a top competitor and a top coach from one of the schools in Japan. He chose to come to New York. He wanted to find Rusty. I mean, the beautiful love story. He didn't even know where to start. He just wanted to find Rusty. Well, lo and behold, he found her. They married. Here I am. And this leads to, I know, this is amazing, because knowing the history, and you know what? I found the love letter that he sent her home with. And it was, Dear Mrs. Stewart, because she was first married to a man named Stewart. I will cherish your friendship, and I want to see you, and I want to be your best friend. It was just so simple and so beautiful. I can't believe, going through all the archives, I found that letter. So,
well, Jean, I have to tell you, this is phenomenal. I mean, if I could editorialize this for 1 second, because I'm just digesting all this stuff. But so I talk with a lot of people in sports media and a lot of women leaders, and one of the things that always comes up is that, and forgive me, I'm generalizing, but I'm going to do it. Women athletes tend to be just so much more interesting than male athletes are once you know the stories. And hearing the story about what your mom and your family has had to overcome, this adversity, this incredible background, it wasn't just like, yeah, I'm going to try really hard because I want to get into college, or I'm going to try really hard because I want to make a lot of money in professional sports. But it was like these incredible life experiences and a willingness to fight and not take no for an answer that led to where your mom went with judo and where you did. And, any advertiser that's listening today, these are the stories that people want to hear. And if you're in media or screenwriting, this is the kind of stuff that people want to hear, because this stuff, it's like the story of the triumph of the human spirit over adversity.
I always say Rusty is the real life Mulan. because she just overcame so much. And the reason I had to tell you the background of Rusty, and there's so many more nuances to it, is how I came to be. So after my parents married, they both taught judo all over. And my mom's OBGYN, her physician, Dr. Bowersax, was one of her students. So while she was teaching and she was pregnant with me, it was time to go to the hospital. Well, they went to the hospital, but he was practicing for his black belt test. So while she was in labor, they were practicing judo and he was picking her up. She was choking him. Now, this is in the hospital. And as a medical doctor, Dr. Greg, you can just imagine seeing one of your colleagues choking one of their patients or pinning or arm locking one of their patients. But they were practicing judo, and this is late 60s. So could you imagine what people were thinking when they were walking by, seeing a woman in a hospital gown, a physician in his white coat, and he's got her in an arm lock, she's got him in a choke. And I mean, this is probably, they were thinking, wow, new birthing method. This is awesome. So then I was born, and, Rusty the whole time was fighting for equality and fighting for women's rights, and not just in judo, but she teamed up with the Women's Sports Foundation, and she met Billie Jean King. She walked up to Billie Jean. She said, "Hi, I'm Rusty Kanakogi from judo. We are being discriminated against. I need your help. We got work to do." Billie said, "Let's go." So she even worked with Billie Jean and a bunch of other women fighting for Title IX, for equality, for sports in school. And then she said, women's judo belongs in the Olympics. And USA Judo at the time, this was an old guard. This was the old misogynistic, good old boys club. And they said, "Well, Rusty, no. Women do not belong in the Olympics. Women shouldn't even be competing in judo." And she said, "Well, why?" And one guy piped in. He said, "Well, their lady parts can get hurt, and their reproductive issues can happen." And Rusty, not being a medical doctor, looked at him and said, "Well, you guys should really worry because our parts are on the inside."
Jean, I'm curious. That's awesome. We heard a story. Someone told me a similar story that they used to like running, and when she was younger, and her grandmother told her not to run. She was an aggressive runner. Took it seriously. She told her not to run because she was afraid her uterus would fall out.
Oh, wow. Very, it's interesting if you think about, and I know Miriam's cracking up. She's like, "Oh, that's where it went." If you think even about some of the antiquated laws that are on the books, like on Sunday, you can't eat porridge because you'll go blind on a Tuesday. I mean, it's just so many old wives' tales that carried over and over and over. And the lack of education that is perpetuated is really, it's sad. It's sad. So there's opinion, and then there's, empirical support. There's research. It's just like the, and I'm going to go there. It's just like the Facebook police. "Oh, you should have shot him in the thumb from 600 feet away because this would have stopped the perpetrator." No, I've never aimed for a person's thumb. And I will be very clear about that. We don't go to stop somebody by shooting somebody in the thumb. It's just, you can't do that. And the people who make the comments about your uterus falling out, about your lady parts getting injured, you can sustain a broken nose or a broken shoulder, and you can sustain a hamstring injury, but I don't really see a common, and Dr. Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see a uterus falling out, and I don't see a lady part getting so injured that it'll damage the reproductive organs. So it's crazy. I don't even want to even spend any more time on people who have such antiquated thinking patterns, because it just doesn't make sense. It's entertaining, and it makes a great meme on social media, but I think that's as far as it should go.
Now, Miriam, I'm curious, because I'd like to pull you into this discussion here. You are a very successful swimmer, and so you came about this sort of from a different angle, and I'd like to get your perception about what it was like as a woman in your sport industry, but also with business. You are involved in the sports business, and I'm curious what your experience is like as a woman sports leader.
I come from a very female oriented environment, right? Synchronized swimming was all female. It's evolved since, thank God. But I had female coaches, female teammates. So it was really, I grew up with this in my sport. And it's really mostly when I joined the workforce that I was more exposed to a different type of environment where women were not necessarily treated the same way. And the first experience I had around this was when I worked in the hotel business for a large multinational that is in the hotel industry. I worked for them in different countries, including in Asia and in Australia. And I was definitely exposed to some really interesting times. When I worked for them in Australia, I was in charge of a brand that was mostly motels in mining towns. So I did a lot of work in the mining towns, and I flew around the country, going to the mining town in really a remote location in Australia, where it was all males, and those hotels were only male clients. And definitely there was a lot of kind of preconceived ideas about women. And certainly I was a young foreign woman working for the headquarters, coming to the local hotel. So there was a lot of things that were coming into play here. But I think having been in sport and knowing, how to be tough, how to deal with challenges, adversity, knowing, just the fact that I could stand up on the pool deck and swim in a pool in front of millions of people at the Olympics. You carry this with you, and you get to this remote hotel, and one of the manager of the hotel was he looked kind of like a biker in remote Australia. And one of his comment was, okay, well, I know you're here to audit this hotel, but I can tell you everything in 2 sentences. We make all of our revenue from alcohol and porn. And I thought, oh, great introduction. But I think as an athlete, you're prepared for this. You're prepared for anything, and you can kind of keep your composure and quickly navigate your way to another part of the conversation and start finding connection with the person in front of you. So those are sort of my experiences of male-dominated environment, and how you bring your qualities as of an athlete, what you've learned through your sport, into this environment. So that kind of circle back. I'm curious, Jean, for you, if you had these experiences where you use these skills that you've learned on the mat on a regular basis every day in your career, right?
Well, absolutely. I learned one of, toughness and being resilient. That seems to be hand in hand, because you also talked about how to deal with adversity. And growing up, I was exposed to a ton of adversity. I'll finish a little bit more about Rusty's story, because this really kind of segues into how I dealt with the adversity and how I understood what discrimination was and what being unfair was about. Because Rusty explained to me, as she was fighting to get women's judo into the Olympics, she had to file a number of lawsuits, including against the International Olympic Committee for discrimination. And she got involved with the Human Rights Association and got them on board. And you know what? She won. She showed discrimination against women in judo. Now, this is the old guard, but now fast forward to 2021, and USA Judo is such a different animal now. USA Judo supports women. Now, granted, men are still dominant in the sport of judo, but what USA Judo has been doing since the new guard took over has been absolutely incredible. There's always room for improvement. There's always room to go. But going back to what Miriam said, is using my judo skills, using the skills that I learned on the mat. first of all, I'm in law enforcement. That is a man's world. That is a male-dominated area. Being in judo was predominantly male-dominated, but once you step on the mat, I never saw color, I never saw race, I never saw gender. To me, it was just, okay, body type, how am I going to fight you? And that's how we were raised. We were raised not to look at anything besides body type. How are you going to fight this person? How are you going to assess your skills and use your skills against this opponent? And that's an amazing way to grow up. So I didn't feel on the mat the difference. When I did feel the difference is on the US team, where I had to sell t-shirts and buttons to fundraise to be able to go to a competition, but yet the men had these gorgeous warm-up suits and they were all funded. That's where I felt the big difference in discrimination with judo. But going into the law enforcement, again, we always had to prove ourselves. As a woman, I always had to go above and beyond. With a man, it's expected that you're supposed to be able to be tactically fit, be able to shoot, be able to fight. With a woman, they would always put you to the test and say, oh, look, she can do this. Like, wow, it's a surprise, I could shoot. Wow, it's a surprise, I could fight. And of course, being somebody who wanted to give back, I volunteered when I became a law enforcement officer to be a defensive tactics instructor. So you have to go through a training academy. I was the only female in the training academy to be a certified instructor, in which obviously I got through it, and the fighting part was very interesting because one point, one of the guys, I think he was challenged that there was a woman in the class, you know, he was uncomfortable with dealing with a woman. So he had to show the girl, you know, he had to show me what it was to go up against a big, strong man. And we were only supposed to give about 60% in fighting because we were both cops and both trying to just train. And he gave me his all. And then I opened up my all. And these innate skills that I learned with judo really showed him that he should learn judo, because you just don't do that. And the first thing, you know, we have these rules, and the first thing they say is, okay, so you get dressed up in this red man outfit and you're doing these fighting skills. First thing they tell everybody, no punches in the head. Well, they dressed me up, and what's the first thing they did? Boom, right in the head. And of course, in judo, I've been dropped on my head. I can't even tell you how many times. So that's how the judo skills work that way. And of course, the fighting skills. But now the woman skills, how do we use these women's skills? We bring a whole different thing to the table. We bring a level of empathy to the table that men have to learn for the most part. But women, it seems to come naturally. And that's where our emotional intelligence gets built. That's where we have our self-regulation. That's how we can contain the emotions, because when you're tough, toughness to me is not compartmentalizing anymore. It's not being stoic. Tough is being able to show your emotions, to be vulnerable, and to be in the solution, and really how you react to the adversity presented to you. It's like resiliency. You have the adverse event, and the B, okay, the ABC of this is the B is how your brain takes this adverse event. Do you react? Is it a knee-jerk reaction? Or do you give yourself the grace and take a breath and then react? Women tend to do that a little bit faster than men. Men have to learn this. So we have such an amazing skill set that we bring to this profession of law enforcement and also in sport. Again, the emotion regulation. So that's some ways I've used some of the skills. And if I could just go on, another way that I use the skill, and I know we talked about it beforehand, the attacks of September 11th. This is what got me through the attacks of September 11th. I was there. I was digging on that pile for about 6 months. At the same time, I was on the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and I was following leads. But when I was on the pile, it was still on fire. I also know that I lost a lot of friends in that pile someplace. So I was digging, and I wouldn't stop. But I had to take a break once in a while, because my eyes were literally burnt shut. I had burns all around my eyes. I had burns around my nose. The inside of my nose was raw. My throat was burned. I had burn marks all around my mouth. So I would go to my parents' house and I would sit in their kitchen in a chair. And my dad, this ninth degree judo samurai warrior, had a bucket and a washcloth, and he was washing my face and cleaning my wounds, just like when I was a little girl, when I was a 6-year-old coming home from the beach, cleaning the sand off my feet. My mother, she got in my ear. She kept my get up and fight going. You are a judo player. You don't stop. You keep digging. You keep going back to that pile. You have a job to do. You find your get up and fight. Every single time you have to go back there. Don't worry. You're strong. And this is what was in my ear while my father was nursing my wounds. So they would clean me up. Once in a while, I would get maybe 2-3 hours of sleep, and then I would go back and continue digging. So that's also how I used my skills, and how my mom was in my ear the whole time to get up and fight.
Wow. Yeah, thank you so much for your service on September 11th. And for those of us who only watched it on TV, like me, I obviously didn't experience any of that, the smells, the touch, the fear, the sadness of being there in person. What drove you to be a 9/11 first responder, and what were your responsibilities?
Well, what drove me is I'm a federal law enforcement officer, and I was my office was 2 blocks away. So this is what we did. We are trained to run towards the danger. If there is a sound that everybody's running away from, we're trained to run towards that sound. And I don't know if it's just we're a little crazy doing it, but just like firefighters run towards the fire, that's what we do. We run towards the danger to help people. That's my oath of public service, is to help people. And what drove me is it was something that had to be done. We had to find, at first it was rescue recovery, but in less than 24 hours, it was strictly recovery. So we wanted to give the closure to whatever families we could. It was such a cognitive overload. We couldn't figure out which end was up. If you're a scuba diver, like you say, follow the bubbles to go up, but we didn't know which end was up. It was so surreal. And it took 20 years for me to actually open up and start talking about it and start trying to piece together the memories, because I've buried everything so deeper than the pile that I was working on. So many people that I know have passed at 9/11, at the attacks, and since, from all the 9/11 related cancers. So what drove me is really my training in judo, to keep going back and be relentless in digging to try to give those families the closure.
I imagine doing something like that, which is so physically draining and so emotionally draining, and working with people that have lost loved ones, that must have been very, as you said, sort of emotionally just devastating. I can imagine that the drive and the discipline from judo is important, but as you mentioned, at the risk of stereotyping, a lot of women seem to have a tremendous amount of empathy, and I can only think that that must have been very valuable in a situation like that, where you must have been able to help comfort people who were suffering at that time, in addition to the physical work you were doing.
It was, and it reminds me of a story that actually I just recently remembered. At one point, I did recall that I was so exhausted. I sat in the street one night and I was leaning up against the building, and also there was another firefighter leaning up against that same building corner. And we pretty much were shoulder to shoulder, just exhausted, and fell asleep. And we woke up maybe about an hour or two, I lost of time. And there was a hot cup of soup in front of me, a little bit of rice, and I think it was from one of the churches that were allowed in the area, that a bottle of water, a towelette. And where the empathy kicks in is we both opened and started drinking and eating. And then this firefighter looked at me and he said, "They're all gone." And at first, it didn't even register because I was just so out of it. And then I told him, "But I'm here." And I put my arm around him. And that, I think, is the level of empathy that is natural and innate to a woman to bring, especially during times of crisis. So I held on to him and I held him and I comforted him and reassured him that I was here. And then we finally got up and we said, let's look for everybody else. But at that moment, he was just so lost. I think bringing the empathy really maybe just gave him that momentary comfort that he needed to find his internal get up and fight to keep going.
Oh, you sort of helped rescue the rescuers.
And that's what I'm doing now with the mental health, helping law enforcement smash that stigma to get help that they need. Because remember, law enforcement, we're exposed to, the average person is exposed to maybe 2 or 3 traumas, major traumas in their lifetime, even vicarious traumas, maybe 3 to 5. Law enforcement in a 20, 25-year career can be exposed to about 800, 850 traumas. I mean, think about what law enforcement and firefighters see versus what the average person sees. And of course, in the medical profession, you're exposed to a lot of traumas. So you can totally understand. So that's why I think it's really part of my purpose to help bridge that gap and help people get the help that they need.
Miriam, you work a lot. Your organization, Athlete Soul, is very committed to helping people, athletes after retirement, and mental health, I know, is an important passion of both of yours. Miriam, I'm wondering if you could share your experience with athletes and mental health issues. If are they comfortable talking about it? Are they reaching out? Are there resources available for them?
So to answer your first question, are athletes comfortable talking about it? I think and I see Jean kind of smiling at this. No, the answer I think is no. It's getting better, and I think with high-profile athlete opening up about their own personal mental health struggles, I think we're seeing a progress in the sports world, but it's very far from what we need. And to be honest, it's not just the athletes, it's every aspect of the sport industry. I think coaches are uncomfortable opening up about their own mental health or seeking help for their own mental health challenges. And so it's kind of difficult to get athletes to then also open up and seek help for their challenges. There are a lot of aspects linked to this, whether it's your scholarship, your place on the team. It's not just opening up for opening up. I think it's really how the implication that it has into your position as an athlete within a group and a team, or if you're in an individual sport, how does it affect your relationship with your coach? How does it affect your relationship with your sponsors, possibly the way your opponent will look at you as well? There was just so many different layers involved with opening up about mental health. I think the second part too is that there's been this culture for years, especially in sport, in repressing negative emotion and not dealing with them and putting them on the side. And now we going 180 and saying, no, actually, you need to feel those things. And it's true, because this is how you're going to build your ability to articulate them, better respond to them, build your skills so that you know how to expand that space between what you're feeling and how you're going to react to it. So I think there's just really different aspects. We're getting more educated, coaches are more educated, athletes are getting more educated. There's also more research in these topics. So we're learning that mental training is a great skill to have and that we need to have it. But I think the short answer is no, there's not enough opening up about mental health in the sports world. And I'm guessing, Jean, that's what you see as well.
I do. I see it both. I see law enforcement and the sports world is very similar, because if we open up about mental health and reach out for help, it's perceived as being shameful or weak. And now couple that and add as a woman feeling emotions. Oh, you see, I told you she was a woman feeling emotions. So all of that is working against reaching out and bridging the gap to find the help that people need. But here's the thing. If you have shame, that is the biggest obstacle. So why are you shameful? Drill down a little bit. Why is there shame? Why are you perceived as weak? And now if you drill down and keep drilling down, and we actually start some resilience training in law enforcement and in the sports world, change that neuroplasticity to look at it instead of why is this happening to me? Look at things in a bigger picture, the broaden and build. And also incorporate the gratitudes, incorporate the kindness, incorporate all of that so that you don't ruminate immediately towards a negative mindset. Oh, you can lose one race or you can lose one match. And the first thing people will say to themselves, because we're the hardest on ourselves as athletes and as people, is, okay, I lost this. Well, I suck. I can't do judo. I can't run. I can't swim. I suck. No, that's not the case. So we want to change that thinking. We want to change that way of thinking. And then once that way of thinking is changed and we start adopting a culture to change that. Now, granted, if you did mess up and you do suck, you suck at that moment, not just overall. So there's a way to deal with it. So we have to work with coaches, because sometimes, just like if you have a dog and your dog makes a mistake, is it a bad dog or is it at the moment a thing that they did? So think about how you address as a coach or as a supervisor, how you address somebody who messes up. Think about how you address yourself if you mess up. Guaranteed, as human beings, the first thing we do when we mess up is we call ourselves all sorts of names. But you know what? Frankly, Miriam, if you were sitting right here with me and you spilled water all over my desk, I wouldn't call you the same names that I would call myself if I spilled water all over my own desk. So that's how we have to be kinder to ourselves first, and then start being kinder to other people when we're in sports. Now, granted, you could still push somebody. You could, my mother raised the bar so high because she knew you can get to that bar. She pushed you to your limits and then above and past them. So we can still do that, but we can do that in a constructive way versus a destructive way.
Self-compassion, that's so important. I think for all of us, whether we're athletes or in the police or military or anything else, is we often don't show ourselves the same level of compassion, as you said, that we would show another person or even our pets, as you mentioned. It sounds like from what I'm hearing from both of you, there's definitely a stigma or shame involved in talking about mental health. But at the same time, there's also a fear of repercussions. If I mention this, either people look down on me and say, I knew that person was weak, or that's a woman and that's what women do, or maybe that they're not tough enough to play the sport or be in police. I'm curious, I want to ask each of you, Miriam, do you think this is getting better or not? And how do you think sort of culturally things can improve?
I think the fear for repercussion hasn't changed tremendously, to be honest. I think opening up and talking about it has changed a little. But I think there are still some strong repercussion for athletes specifically who speak up about their struggles. And I think there are two types of fears. There are the fear for repercussion, kind of for something that's external, but there's also this additional fear that's more individual to each athlete and perhaps more internal. I feel there's fear of being overwhelmed by your emotions and your negative emotion, and I think that really scares athletes who are used to be in control all the time. But if you take the time and the opportunity to accept those negative or unpleasant emotions and go through them, they actually will go much faster and will dissipate much faster than if you're worried of the emotion and in turn even more worried, then you feel even more overwhelmed, and what happens is like you're really clinging onto them. So I think there are two aspects, but there's definitely fears, but there are different reasons for those fears, and I think both of them haven't changed very much yet.
Jean, what about you? What is your experience in law enforcement or judo, or just you're involved in so many things, I don't know how to narrow it down. Do you think that this is getting better, this sort of element of shame and talking about mental health, and with someone, is that improving, or what recommendations do you have to help improve the culture around mental health?
Well, I have to tell you, I want to piggyback a little bit what Miriam said, that if you start saying your emotions and getting a hold of them, then you can work through them. So I came up with something that you have to say it to slay it. So if you can, instead of being one big ball of emotion, if you can really just peel the onion and figure, okay, why am I so ticked off today? What's eating at me? And really saying, okay, well, I'm angry, I'm upset, and really being able to articulate them, it will help people be able to manage their emotions a lot better and be not only better people, but be able to focus on their training and be better athletes and overall. So is it getting better? Let's see. I can tell you that in judo, I know that the top of USA Judo definitely embraces mental health and wellness, and he's very, very caring. I'm pretty sure he's on this. Is amazing because he's all in, and he cares about the mental health and well-being of the athletes. So in USA Judo, the climate is, yes, it is getting better because people can reach out. They have mental health people available. In law enforcement, just the recent legislation, the confidential opportunities for peer support is showing that it is available. It is getting better. You know, we've had, I'd have to say, about 126 suicides in law enforcement this year. That's astronomical. So trying to open up and trying to give these confidential opportunities, and what we're doing now that it's been signed into law, it's getting better to the point where accessibility is available. We work with a group that works with culturally competent counselors. And when I say that, going to a regular counselor that doesn't understand the law enforcement culture, how we see things, how we do things, that it's almost, it's an uphill battle. Because if I say, okay, we did this, this, and this, a counselor understands one way and they might not understand the nuance. Just like a culturally competent counselor for sport would understand the training and understand the sacrifice. Athletes sacrifice so much. I know personally I sacrificed a heck of a lot of a social life and a lot in school to become a top level athlete. So I know that counselors have to have that training, or maybe athletes that have become counselors, peer counselors for athletes, peer counselors for law enforcement will completely help. And then also working with culturally competent trained counselors will help. So yes, it is getting better, but it's not where it needs to be yet.
And Greg, I to echo what you're saying, Jean, I think that the narrative has changed, the will is there. It hasn't fully trickled down yet, simply because we don't have the trained resources at every level, in every club, in every structure. So it's going in the right direction. It's just, it needs to come down slowly, step by step.
And one thing people need to realize is the athlete that's on TV, the athlete they see in the Olympics, the law enforcement officer they see in the street or on the television or in the news, we're all human. We're all human beings. We live, we breathe, we feel, we get hurt, we have emotions. We're all human.
Well, this is tremendous. Miriam, I'll let you wrap things up. I don't know if you have some more questions before we go. I'm very moved by this whole conversation about so much struggle to overcome adversity, and even as recently as in the 50s and 60s, the sexism and challenges that women had to overcome, and that we still haven't completely passed those now. It's heartbreaking and uplifting at the same time to see that we've made progress, but there's so much more to do.
And Greg, perhaps we can end on one of the questions from the audience. That's maybe on a positive note. It's a question from Mikhail Miller, who is saying, what excites you guys about the visibility of women in sports today? And what would you like to see happen from women in sport and business? Maybe we can end on a nice uplifting note.
Well, I'll kick in and say that I am excited to see more visibility for women on television, women's sports being televised, and more visibility on highlighting women athletes. So that really excites me. What I would like to see is one word: more.
I think what excites me, many of you know, I've got 2 daughters, they're 9, and I'm kind of pushing them to play sports, but they've never ever said to me, that's for boys, or boys do that, or I'm a girl, I don't do that. I've never in any way sensed any kind of self-doubt that because they're girls, they shouldn't be playing sports, or that they're behind boys in any way. And I think that's because we're seeing more and more successful, empathetic, inspirational women leaders and women athletes.
I think for me, Greg, it's the co-ed sport, or the fact that women and male are now competing with each other in teams, in swimming, in different sport, or that we've seen, for example, at the Tokyo Olympics, that a woman won the equestrian competition for the first time. I love to see more women and male together, because I think everybody brings different skills to the table, and they're very complementary. And so, I don't do my sport anymore, but I can only imagine how exciting it would have been to be all together and not separated. And like you, Greg, I have a daughter, and she does 2 sports that are co-ed, and it's so exciting to see that she is exposed to both girls and boys from a young age. I think that's really important to build emotional intelligence and a positive attitude in life. So for me, that's the hope, is that we see much more inclusivity in co-ed sport. All right, guys. Jean, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your story and that of your mother, and such an inspiring story. I mean, I was really excited and happy to hear that. And Dr. Greg, as usual, a pleasure to have you moderate. And for all of those who have listened today, we have recorded the event. It will be available on the Women's Sports Forum if you would like to rewatch it or share it with your organization and other sports member. So for that, go to the Women's Sports Forum website, or you can connect with Greg as well on LinkedIn.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here, Jean. Phenomenal. Miriam, as always, a great talk, and we're looking forward to next month.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.